So midpoint. You learned about midpoint in IM 1, right? Can someone tell me a definition that they have for midpoint in their own words? Yeah.
The line between 2 points.
Okay, so the line between 2 points or the point between 2 points, can we expand on that? What else would midpoint mean? The middle of the distance between the middle of the distance of like the line segment. Okay, so if I have a midpoint here, I know it's in the middle. So that's a midpoint. It's in the middle of that line segment. What are those end ones called?
Endpoints.
Endpoints. Okay, so I have 2 endpoints and a midpoint, right? Now, if I tell you the entire length of that segment is 10, for instance, could you tell me the distance from the endpoint to the midpoint? It's what? It's 5. On both sides, right? Because they're the same. The midpoint is the same distance from either of the 2 endpoints. Do you agree with that? Okay. Now, we're going to use the midpoint formula. Does anyone remember that from IM 1? No? Okay. Midpoint formula.
Oh wait, is it x1?
X1 plus X2 divided by 2, comma, Y1 plus Y2 divided by 2. Now, when you actually find your answer for a midpoint, the answer is a point. It is an XY coordinate. Okay, so it's in parentheses, it has a comma, but it's X and Y. It is a point. So you need parentheses, you need that comma. Okay? All right, so let's start by finding the midpoint. So how about -4, comma 6, and -5, comma -8. What do you think the first thing I'm going to tell you to do is? I think I heard it. Before we plug in. So label X1, Y1, X2, Y2. The reason we label is because we are less likely to screw it up than if we don't. Can we still screw it up if we label and or don't label? Yeah, but we're probably less likely to, especially if we know the formula. Okay, so I know what my X's and Y's are, so I'm going to plug it in. -4 plus a -5 divided by 2. And then 6 plus -8 divided by 2. -4 plus a -5, what does that give you? -9 over 2. And 6 plus -8? -2 over 2. And we're going to simplify that. Now, -9 over 2. Is there a number that goes into 9 and 2? No. I don't want a decimal. You're going to leave your answer as a fraction. Okay? So we're going to leave it as -9 over 2. If you were asked to graph this point, it would be easier to make it a decimal because you need to know where it is on a graph. But since we're not graphing, just leave it as a fraction. We can, however, reduce -2 over 2. What does that reduce to? -1. So if you can reduce the fraction, you need to. If you can't, you're going to leave it as is. Okay? You think you can try one?
Yes.
Yes? How about -9, -6, and -9, -5. So take a second and see if you can find the midpoint of those 2 endpoints. All right, so X1, Y1, X2, Y2. When I plug it in, -9 plus -9 over 2. And -6 plus -5 over 2. -9 plus -9? gives you a negative 18 over 2. Negative 5 plus negative 6 is negative 11 over 2. Can I reduce this first fraction? Yes, to negative 9. And then negative 11 over 2 I cannot reduce. How do we feel about those two? Not too bad. Do you need to see another one on finding midpoint? Does anybody need to see one? No? We're okay? All right. So what if I ask you to find an endpoint? Okay, so here we're going to find the endpoint. Now I'm going to tell you one endpoint is negative 9, 10, and the midpoint is 2, negative 6. Now, there are two ways that we can do this. One way uses the formula. The other one uses basic algebra, and I think that second way is probably a little bit easier to understand. So I'm going to give you the option. Do you want me to show you both ways, or do you want me to show you the one that I think is the easier to understand? Both ways. Okay, so let's start with the harder of the two ways to make the easy way seem easy. Okay, so if I use the midpoint formula, which I know is up here, right? The endpoint is still my x1, y1. My other endpoint, which I don't know, is my x2, y2. Just like it was before, right? Your endpoints are your x1, y1, x2, y2. Are you okay with that? Which means your midpoint, what's left in this formula to plug in? So I have x1s and y1s and x2s and y2s. What's left over here? Just an xy. Okay, so that means my midpoint is xy. Okay, so far so good? I'm going to take that as a yes. So x1 is negative 9 plus, do I know what x2 is? No. So I'm going to just write in x2 and divide it by 2. Okay. Y1 is 10, and I don't know what y2 is, so I'm going to leave it there and divide it by 2. But I do know my midpoint is 2, negative 6. So I know when I add those endpoints together and divide, I get 2, negative 6. Everyone okay with that? Okay. Now, I have to solve for x2 and y2. So because it's a ordered pair or a point, I'm going to take the x coordinate and set it equal to the x coordinate. So negative 9 plus x2 over 2 equals 2. So the x coordinate gets set equal to the x coordinate. Is this something I can solve? Yeah. What would I do to get x2 by itself? What would I do here? Okay, so multiply by 2. So that's my just basic algebra skills. These will cancel. Right? Leaving me with negative 9 plus x2 equals 4. And then what would be my last step? Add 9. Everyone okay with that? So x2 equals, bless you, x2 equals 13? Right? So that's the x coordinate. I'm going to do the exact same thing for y, except I'm going to set the y coordinate equal to the y coordinate. So 10 plus y2 over 2 equals negative 6. That blue's hard to see. Okay, same process, so I still multiply both sides by 2, leaving me with 10 plus y2 equals negative 12. And if I subtract 10 from both sides, I get y2 equals negative 22. Right? Which means that final endpoint, which I'm looking for, is 13 comma negative 22. So this would be my answer. That was a lot of, not a lot of work, but it was some work. Okay, so that's the first way you can go about it. I think you're going to like the second way more. Okay, so you ready to see how the second way works? Okay, so I'm going to draw a segment. I know the endpoint is negative 9, 10, and I know the midpoint is 2, negative 6, and I'm searching for the other endpoint. Do you agree with that? Okay. Up at the very top of our notes, we said that the distance from the endpoint to the midpoint and then from the other endpoint to the midpoint are going to be the same. So if I know the distance from one endpoint to the midpoint, I should know the distance to the other endpoint, right? So if I look here, how do I go from negative 9, and I'm talking about just the x-coordinate right now, how do I go from negative 9 to 2? How many units is that? Some of you in your head can figure that out. If you can't, I start at negative 9, I add something to it, and I get 2. Can you solve that equation? Okay, I would add 9, so x equals 11, which means the x-coordinate is 11 units away. So to get to this other endpoint, I'm going to add 11. What's 2 plus 11? 13. Isn't that what I already got? Okay. So I'm going to do the same thing for y. How do I get from 10 to negative 6? So 10 plus something on the y equals negative 6. If I subtract 10, what does y equal? Negative 16. So that means I'm subtracting 16 units to get to the midpoint, which means I need to subtract 16 units to get to the other endpoint. What is negative 6 minus 16? Negative 22. Here is my endpoint. So you can do the first one, or you can do the second one. I have no preference. Okay, whatever one you like better. Just by a show of hands, who likes the first one? Who likes the second one? Okay, so here's where you get to choose. I'm going to give you another endpoint and midpoint, and I would like you to use one of the two. I don't care which one you use. And I want you to find the other endpoint. Okay, so the endpoint is 3, negative 10. And my midpoint is negative 1, 4. So I would like you to find the other endpoint. Either method. So if you have, I'm going to do the second method because it looked like as I was going around, more people were going with that one. So negative 3, negative 10, and then negative 1, 4, and I'm going to find my other endpoint. So from 3 to negative 1, how many units away is that? Negative 4 units. So I subtract 4 units. You need to make sure you subtract 4 again. Negative 1 minus 4 is negative 5. Okay. Now how many units away is the y? So I have negative 10 plus y equals 4. What does y equal? Positive 14. So I'm adding 14 units to my y. What's 14 plus 4? 18. Your final answer, whether you use method 1 or method 2, should be negative 518. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Do we need to see anything else? Are we okay? We're okay?